Buenos dias. Welcome. I hope you slept well last night. Today we are talking about sleep trackers because there are some pros, there are some cons, and there are folks that sleep trackers work quite well for, and there are also folks that they actually tend to work quite poorly for. They can even impair sleep for some people. And so we're going to chat about whether a sleep tracker is a good call for you as an individual or not. We're also going to cover what the best overall sleep tracker is in my opinion, how I track my own sleep personally, what I do with my clients, as well as exactly how to improve your sleep tonight. So let's dig in. How do sleep trackers actually work? Primarily, they are tracking movement, okay? They often also track things like heart rate, respiration, and temperature, but the two biggies are movement and your heart rate via your pulse on your wrist, because most trackers are made for the wrist. Pretty simple stuff. So first we'll get into the pros. One of the biggest pros of sleep trackers are that they often change behavior for the better. Because when you start paying closer attention to something, by definition, it is more of a focus than it had been prior. We see this via food diaries and food tracking apps, right? People start tracking their food intake, and the simple act of tracking itself improves their food choices because it has them bring more awareness to what they're putting in their mouths versus it being a lot more mindless. So what folks often find is that simply implementing something like a food diary has them lose fat without actually implementing a formal quote-unquote diet. Same deal here in regards to sleep trackers. Also, the visual cue of having something on your wrist reminds you of why it's there. This also increases awareness. For example, whenever my clients are having a hard time drinking enough water throughout the day, I have them pick up a water bottle that they love and just get them to take it with them everywhere. And the visual cue of seeing that water bottle reminds them to drink. Now, this concept can also work against us, and this is why I'm so big on food environment. If you weren't thinking about a donut, you aren't craving a donut, nothing about you was focused on donuts in the slightest, but you arrive home and there's a fresh box of your favorite flavor of donuts sitting on the counter. All of a sudden, you're probably craving donuts, right? Visual cues impact our behavior way more than we like to think that they do, especially because we like to think that we have tons of agency. Humans tend to think that they are influenced a lot less by their environment than they actually are. This is why companies invest tens of millions of dollars in marketing. Shit works. Another pro to sleep trackers is that if you are numbers oriented, they can really benefit you in the sense that you might really enjoy looking at your sleep data and seeing that you slept for 8.5 hours, let's say. Folks that like data, spreadsheets, stats, etc. tend to like tracking their sleep because the feedback itself keeps them on track with the behavior that they want to implement. Now a few cons. Accuracy. This is a biggie because the only super accurate way to track sleep is via going into a sleep lab where they document your brain waves via something called polysomnography. Simply tracking movement and your pulse is nowhere near the same thing, especially because humans move while they sleep. We have a fair number of something called microarousals throughout the night, where we may flip over, switch positions, find the cool side of the pillow, and this is totally normal. I'm sure that you've noticed that you don't necessarily wake up in the same position that you fell asleep in. We're not mummies when we sleep, and because sleep trackers rely on movement and we move, the accuracy of said trackers leave a fair bit to be desired. Now, the biggest drawback, without a doubt, in my opinion, sleep tracker wise, is a psychological one, which I've seen plenty of times in my clients. So let's say you go to bed, you sleep soundly throughout the night, you wake up feeling refreshed and alert, and then you look at your sleep score or data and it says that you slept like shit. You then begin to question how you actually feel. You're like, did I not sleep that well? Am I actually tired right now and I don't realize it? What's going on here? This defeats the whole purpose of why you got a sleep tracker to begin with, right? You want to improve your sleep experience. Now, it can also play out in a different way, in the sense that let's say that you don't sleep well, your mind was racing all night, and you woke up feeling really tired and just worn out. And you look at your sleep data and it says that you slept like a baby, but you actually know that you didn't because you can feel it. This is where that accuracy component really rears its head again. So this potential mismatch between what sort of sleep the data says that you got and how you actually feel can throw folks off. And in my opinion, how you feel is where the rubber really meets the road. Now, there is an interesting caveat here, and it is the following. When people are well slept, they tend to know that they are well slept. And then if they have an off night, they really feel it. However, if they have another consecutive off night, they feel it a little bit less, and another, and they feel it even less. And after, say, 4 to 7 nights, a new normal tends to set in. And when this happens, you'll often hear folks say things like, I can get by on X number of hours, which is typically in the 4 to 6 hour range, depending on the individual. And the truth is, they are heavily impaired. We require 7 to 9 hours of sleep nightly. There have been a whole bunch of studies on this, and it turns out that folks that have been sleep deprived for a period of time are really bad at assessing their impairment and performance. And the way that that performance is often tracked in sleep studies is via things like reaction time, which speed up when we are well slept and slow way down when we are underslept, which makes perfect sense. This is why we see a spike in car accidents the first morning when folks go back to work after the clocks spring forward. Most people are functioning on at least an hour less of sleep. This impairs decision making and reaction time, and voila, we've got more car crashes. Point being, stay mindful of the following. If you've been getting 6 hours of sleep or less per night for a period of time, you are underslept. If you say things like, I can get by on X number of hours per night, you're almost certainly underslept, because getting by, or in other words, surviving, is very much different than thriving. Also, if you can drink a cup of coffee and go to bed, not good. We see this a lot in shift workers because they are so sleep deprived that caffeine often doesn't even impact them. This is a big red flag. As far as my clients go, a number of them do use the sleep tracking feature on their step counters, but the whole reason why they have a wearable to begin with is that we track step counts for 98% of my clients, because it's just so important to know how much we are moving throughout the day from a fat loss and health standpoint. Saying I worked out for an hour tells me nothing about the other 23 hours of the day. And truth be told, when it comes to fat loss, the other 23 hours are far more important and impactful from a movement perspective than the single hour-ish in the gym is. Now, what do I do personally? I prioritize my sleep in a big way, but I don't formally track it via a sleep tracker. And instead, I focus on the behaviors that I know set me up for great sleep, and by far, the most effective perspective to take when it comes to setting yourself up for success is acknowledging the fact that a great night's sleep starts the second that you wake up in the morning. So here's what I'm sure to do. Get daylight exposure in my eyes as early as possible because this anchors my circadian rhythm, which is just a fancy way of saying that it lets your body know what time of day it is. And the easiest way to think about this is if you were trapped in a windowless basement around the clock. This messes up your circadian rhythm because the primary way that our bodies know what time of day it is via the sun, or essentially light exposure. It's actually really cool. We have light receptors in our eyes that aren't actually involved in vision. They only detect light, and they send that light message to the master clock in our bodies, and the master clock is something called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or SCN for short. And the SCN lets the rest of our body know what time it is. So basically, if you want to mess with your sleep, don't get daylight exposure early in the day, and be sure to mess around with your phone on the brightest setting right before bed. This is doing things perfectly backwards in terms of our evolutionary biology. And we wonder why so many folks have sleep issues, right? I also set my room up so it is cool and dark. And if the darkness piece is tough to implement for whatever reason, just use a sleep mask. I have used one every single night for probably a decade now. It's been a game changer. I also use earplugs every night, and it's not because I'm especially sensitive to noise. I'm actually not, but they increase my sleep quality. Another huge component to sleep is meal size and meal timing. So what I recommend to my clients is allowing an absolute minimum of 2 to 3 hours between their last bite and when they go to bed. And for me, I like to push that to 4-ish hours even sometimes, because I notice that I sleep even better. It doesn't always play out that way, especially on weekends, but that's the target. Now, there's obviously a point of diminishing returns here, because you don't want to go to bed hungry. That's not conducive to quality sleep either, so find the sweet spot or range that works best for you. And what you choose to eat also matters because of digestion purposes, of course. It's tough to sleep with a messed up stomach, and because if your diet is off track, your blood sugar, by definition, is off track. And so if you have funky blood sugar swings throughout the night, they're gonna wake you up. So when it comes to nutrition and sleep, what you eat, how much you eat, and when you eat all play an important role. If you are waking up with the night sweats and you know that your room isn't too hot, you almost certainly ate too much and or too close to bed, or you drank too much alcohol and or too close to bed, or you ate and drank too much and or too close to bed. Booze is just about the best way to impair sleep. It works so well. It often reduces the time that it takes people to fall asleep, but then there's almost like this rebound effect where people are just in and out of sleep constantly throughout the night, whether they're aware of it or not. And this isn't that micro arousal sort of situation, which is totally normal. It's a completely different dealio via fragmented or extremely choppy sleep. Caffeine intake is another biggie because it's not only when you drink caffeine, how much matters as well, because caffeine clearance varies between individuals like crazy. For example, the average person's half-life of caffeine is about 6 to 8 hours. But this is the tricky thing with averages, because you are not necessarily smack dab in the middle of the curve. And so we see that some folks have a caffeine half-life of 4 hours and others land in the 36-hour range. There is huge variation. Now you may be wondering, what does half-life even mean? It's super simple. And this is helpful to know because it doesn't just apply to caffeine, it applies to other drugs as well. So, if you drink a standard cup of coffee at 8 a.m. and it has 200 milligrams of caffeine in it, if you happen to be the average person, 6 to 8 hours later, you will have 100 milligrams of caffeine in your bloodstream. Hence, half-life, because half of 200 is 100. 6 to 8 hours after that, you will have 50 milligrams of caffeine in your bloodstream. 6 to 8 hours after that, you will have 25 milligrams of caffeine in your bloodstream. And so you might be thinking, oh my God, I've got caffeine in my system 24/7. That could be the case. But it's worth mentioning, we don't necessarily need caffeine to be at 0 milligrams in order to sleep. But the further that milligram amount is pushed up, the more likely it is that it's going to impact your sleep negatively. And so, just because you have 4 cups of coffee before noon doesn't mean that it's not going to impair your sleep that night. It absolutely can. Meaning, timing matters, but so does the amount. And so personally, I typically have 2 cups of coffee in the morning and they're usually down the hatch and done by 8 a.m. And anything past that is a decaf for me just because I protect my sleep that way. And honestly, if you get some good coffee beans or go to a tasty shop, decaf is still legit. It tastes the same. What's the best sleep tracker? From the research that I've done, the Oura Ring seems to be the best, which is actually a ring and not a wrist-worn wearable. It's also the most expensive, which typically is the case. Now, full disclosure, I've never used it and I don't have any affiliation with the company. So putting that all together, you can decide whether a sleep tracker is the right call for you, and if you do choose to use one, just keep the pros and cons in consideration at all times, and most of all, don't let the metrics override your personal experience. If you'd like to apply for one-on-one nutritional coaching and or workout design with me, you can click the link in the description below or head on over to n1fitness.com/coaching. You can follow me up on Instagram at N1Fitness, on TikTok at the N1Fitness, and on YouTube at Marcus Sadu. Feel free to leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform if you'd like to, and be sure to hit the subscribe button. Thanks so much for tuning in. I hope that you found this episode useful. Sleep well tonight, and I will catch you on the next one. See ya.